Good afternoon, and welcome to our 10th edition of Who Knew? Today, resident Lee Perkins will interview his friend and fellow resident Barbara Chavatel. During this interview, we will learn all about Barbara's exciting childhood spent living in the Virginian Hotel in Lynchburg, including the long list of celebrity hotel guests she was fortunate to meet. We will also get to hear about her love of education and her lifelong, 39-year-long career as an educator. She loves education, and we are excited that we'll be able to learn all about Barbara today. We're airing today's program live on TV 970, but of course, we have our live audience. So after the interview, we'll have time for questions, and we'll come around with a mic. So now I will turn it over to Lee and Barbara.
I am honored today to have a chance to interview Barbara Chavatel. I met Barbara a few weeks after I moved to Westminster Canterbury back in 2013 when I was a new resident and I was invited to have dinner with Barbara and a few of her friends. I soon realized that Barbara was the right person to get to know early because not only did she know virtually everyone at Westminster Canterbury, both residents and staff, but she also knew everything about Westminster Canterbury. However, what impressed me the most was that she knew everything about Judy Garland, who was my favorite singer. For that reason alone, I was very happy when she became an active member of my senior summer Latin class. When Barbara was 2 years old, she and her family moved into the Virginian Hotel in Lynchburg, and she lived there until 1957, when she started her teaching career with the Newport News Virginia Public Schools. Later on, Barbara moved to Abington, Virginia, and became an instructional supervisor for the Washington County school system, where she was instrumental in getting art instructors at all the elementary schools. Barbara also read scripts as part of an advisory committee for Theater 4 in Richmond, which presented performances for school-age audiences throughout Virginia. Barbara was a member of the board of directors for the Arts Depot, the Washington County Public Library Foundation, and the Arts Advisory Committee at Virginia Highlands Community College. And now I'm going to turn to Barbara to find out how growing up in a hotel prepared her for all these activities. Welcome to Who Knew?
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you, Lee, and I want to publicly commend Lee. He's done a lot of research and has worked very hard to prepare for today, and I certainly do appreciate it. I'm very honored that he's willing to share the stage today with me. Very honored. I moved into the hotel when I was 2.5 years old because my mother said, "You will never know your father." Hotel business is 24/7, and it was not unusual in those days, and this would be in the, I'd say, late 30s, around 1939, for management to live in the hotel. In fact, the previous manager at the Virginian lived there, and so that was not unusual. I understand today that that is not so, except in Europe. That most managers live elsewhere, and the present manager of the Virginian lives in the city of Lynchburg, not in the hotel. It was interesting for me, and of course it was interesting for the staff and everyone else to deal with a little bit, almost 2.5-year-old little girl with her tricycle who liked to go up and down the halls. Well, that's where I could exercise. Now, I was very careful not to knock on doors and move quickly, you see. So I tried to behave as best I could. But I enjoyed the people there, enjoyed meeting people there. The hotel was very much a Lynchburg institution and well supported by the city. For example, I would sometimes get on my tricycle on Church Street, and I'd go down to the city hall and ride around there to see what was going on. Then I would go to the C&P Telephone Company and see what was going on there. Then I might go down to the post office to see what was going on there. But on Church Street, I would wear my sunsuit. But if I went on Main Street, I'd have to dress. Now, where I got this, I don't know, but you ladies may remember back in those days, in the 40s and even early 50s, if you went shopping, you wore your hat and your shoes. I mean, you looked good. Shopping was an experience. Now it's something we have to do to get in and out as quickly as we can, I guess. I think we've lost something that way. But anyway, that's what I encountered when I first got there. And I think I learned a lot too. So, Lee?
Yep. I don't think you told us yet, but when was the Virginian Hotel built?
All right, it was built in 1913. And it became sort of the center of activity in the city. All the civic clubs met there. Monday, the Rotary Club, Thursday, the Kiwanis Club, and so on. So I'd see all these people going in and out of the ballroom is where they mostly met. It was the center for many of the activities of the colleges there. Randolph-Macon Women's College, I have to sort of emphasize that. And Sweetbriar, very near. And Lynchburg College, VES, Virginia Episcopal School, all of the colleges had events at the hotel. So there was always something going on until the 1960s, which I'll talk about. That's when motels came on the scene, parking, everybody had to have their car by their door. And so hotels came hard times in the 60s. You remember the John Marshall closed. The Jefferson got on shaky ground, even here in Richmond. So it was very difficult. And what happened to the Virginian was that Jerry Falwell bought it in the mid-60s, in 69, a little bit after that, because he was building Liberty University at that time. And this became a dormitory for his students. Now, when that got built, they vacated the hotel, and the city bought it for an old folks' home and for mainly people who had nowhere else to go. And then eventually it closed, and it was in very bad situation, which I'll get to a little bit later because I have a good ending to all of this.
Great.
Lee?
Yes.
All right.
Now, what do you think were some of the advantages to growing up in a hotel?
All right, I think there were many advantages. Of course, I saw life firsthand, and that's not altogether bad. My mother was very, very protective. She had to be. Almost when I got a little older, I thought maybe she was too protective, but nevertheless, she had to be. And I felt like I saw many different kinds of people. I thought it helped me to be able to relate to different kinds of people, and I think especially when I became a teacher, because I became more aware of good and bad things about all students, about my students, and I think I became more understanding, and I think that put me in good stead, at least I hope it did. And so I think even though I missed a neighborhood, I missed having to go out and play with children my age, I didn't have any pets. I had an imaginary dog, which I talked about a lot, and people went to my parents and said, I didn't know Barbara had a dog. Well, the dog looked like, guess who? Lassie. Because Lassie was in the movies, at that time. So I just imagined that I had a Lassie, which was fine. But I never did have a dog or a pet. I did go down to the furnace room sometime when my father I would follow him around at night after dinner if he was making the rounds of the hotel. And there were always feral cats hanging out down there. Well, I don't think he encouraged me to play with them too much. But at least I saw that there were cats somewhere or some type of pet on the premises there. Of course, a lot of this was during World War II. And Camp Pickett, which is in Blackstone, fairly near Lynchburg, the soldiers would come on the weekends. And one day, a soldier, my mother and I were in the lobby, and this soldier from Camp Pickett came by and grabbed me, picked me up just like that. Scared my mother. She didn't know what to say or what to do. And he said, "Oh, don't be frightened. I have a little girl just your age, and I just had to do this." And so that made us both feel okay about that. I didn't feel afraid, and we had a good conversation as a result of that. Also, during World War II, they sold lots of war bonds. I imagine some of us in the audience remember at school, buying war bonds and all that kind of thing. Well, celebrities would come to Lynchburg to sell these war bonds. And of course, I was right there. This is when I was probably about 6 or 7 years old. And I remember that Greer Garson, I hope some of you remember Greer Garson, a wonderful actress. She was in every movie with Walter Pidgeon, if you remember that, Mrs. Miniver, and so forth. Well, she was in the lobby, and people were crowded around. And I thought to myself, I really want to meet her. Now, how am I going to do it? So I got on my knees, maybe it's why my knees don't work today, and crawled through everybody's feet, and came up right under her. And she looked down and said, and I'll never forget it, she was so beautiful, she says, "Hello, sweet thing." I'll never forget that, And how nice for her to do that. I think it said something about her. And so I've always wanted to go to every Greer Garson picture that was shown, and TCM, which still shows some of the old movies, which I don't have that network anymore. I wish I did. But nevertheless, it's wonderful to see that. The others that I met, very impressive. And I remember this, even though this is many, many years ago, Helen Keller came to the hotel. And somehow or another, she was talked into meeting me. And I remember that she put her hands on my face. And I remember that I must have been about maybe 4 years old, if that. And I remember she said, "Oh, what a pretty little girl," And you never forget something like that. I probably didn't even know who Helen Keller was at that time, but later on I did find out who she was. Others who came, Nelson Eddy, my friend Connie Sorota's idol. He came as part of the war bond drive, but he didn't want to mix with the people in the hotel lobby. So my father had to take him down on the freight elevator so that he could go at the back entrance to go to the city armory where his event was going to take place. So from that time on, I didn't much care for Nelson Eddy. Maybe that's no big thing. I'm sure he didn't worry about that, but nevertheless, I met Gene Autry because I used to go to the ISIS theater. Some of you Lynchburgers know about that. You go in the theater and you don't see a screen. You say, "Well, what's going on here?" You have to turn around and see the screen. And they have cowboy movies every Saturday afternoon. And a lot of those with Gene Autry. And I was able to meet him. I didn't meet Trigger, but nevertheless, I did meet him. Okay? I met Ronald Reagan when he came to Lynchburg, when General Electric moved their big factory, or I would say business, into Lynchburg. And I was very impressed. He had the best suntan I've ever seen anybody have. I remember at that time. He came down as a GE spokesman. And also, some of you remember Sammy Kaye, the band leader? Swing and Sway with Sammy Kaye. Remember that? Well, his band came to Lynchburg, and the piano player came up to me, and I guess I was around, and he introduced himself to me. He said, "I understand your name is Barbara." And I said, "Yes." He said, "Well, I will get you the autograph of everybody in the orchestra, because your name is Barbara, and my little girl's name is Barbara." So I got everybody's autograph, and I'll never forget that too, I hope some of you remember some of these people here. But anyway, that was part of it. Mm-hmm. And if I had not lived in the hotel, I don't think I would have met Greer Garson or Helen Keller or other people. And of course, there were other people that had been there through the years, because Eleanor Roosevelt was there. I did see her. And Lynchburg is sort of centrally located in the state, so that was kind of a good place to go out of if you have business elsewhere. Okay?
You mentioned later on that the Virginian functioned as a home for older people, but in listening to you describe the things, some of your adventures when you were there as a child, it sounds like the Virginian could function even when you were there as retirement home for people.
Yes, it did. In other words, it seems like I've come full circle here, but it did function because in those days there was nothing like this. Any place for an elderly person to go who had no family, they would have to go to a nursing home. But many people who could came to hotels because you would be cared for. Somebody would check on you every day. You had your meals. It was usually in a downtown location. In the case of Lynchburg, the Allied Arts Building was just across the street, and almost all the doctors were there. So you had access to medical and drugstores and all of that. And there were several ones that I remember distinctly. And one was named Mr. Estes. He was a tall gentleman who came, had no family. But every evening after dinner, he would sit in the lobby. Well, I like to go and sit near him and hear him talk about his family and about himself and what he did. And so I learned to appreciate older people, thank goodness, because, we all, if we live, get to be that, and so I was very lucky in that. And another resident of the hotel who was there because it was a place to be, was a Mrs. Nelson. Mrs. Nelson was a wonderful poet. She was a member of the American Pen Women's Association. But she was very eccentric. And my mother told me, now, stay away from Mrs. Nelson. She maybe doesn't want to be bothered with you. And that was the worst thing she could have said, because I made a point then of seeing Mrs. Nelson and talking to her. She had a very sad life. She had lost a daughter, and she would go maybe once a week to the cemetery. And she had a driver, and she had a car she called a Packard. My father saw it was a Buick, but at that time, Packards were a little more higher class. So she had a Packard, and she sat in the back seat with this little doll that maybe looked like her daughter. Well, so that was sad in itself. Well, anyway, I made a good friend of her, and we enjoyed each other. A very, very interesting person to talk to, as you can imagine. And she gave me a book of her poetry, and I still have it. And it's valuable. And I think because she was an unusual person and also a very sad person, it helped me to understand that's what can happen to you when tragedies occur, whether you realize it or not. And then another resident, Mrs. Moses. If you're familiar with Lynchburg at all, there was a clothing store there called D. Moses. And most of the old guard in Lynchburg went there to shop. Well, Mrs. D. Moses, who had no close family at the time, moved into the hotel. And I became a good friend of hers as well. Well, in 1952, there was a grease fire in the hotel. If that can have something, and it goes right on through everything, and smoke filled the hotel. Well, here comes the news in advance, newspaper people, and all of that. I don't think we had TVs quite then, but we had a lot of the radio and newspaper coming to descend it on the hotel. And my father had to go up because Mrs. Moses really couldn't walk well to get her and carry her out because the hotel was filling with smoke. Well, unfortunately, there was a photographer right there to see him carrying her out of the hotel. Well, my father couldn't smoke in front of my mother because she was an asthmatic, but somehow or another, he had an unlit cigarette in his mouth. this made the front page of the newspaper, which of course was interesting in itself. Now, what was I doing all this time? Well, I was writing my essay that I had not written because I'd waited till the last minute on Sunday night to get it in for Monday. And if any of you are E.C. Glass graduates from Lynchburg, you remember Miss Elsie Talbot. And I better have that essay because I would be in deep trouble if I didn't. So I said, I don't care if the hotel's on fire or what, I've got to get this through. So the firemen, luckily it wasn't so bad that I couldn't really stay there. But I think they wanted me out, not sitting there with the hotel on fire. So that's part of the, I guess, the period of that time.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So now, I'm sure everybody wants to know, how did living in the hotel turn you into a lover of movies?
Well, most of you who know me well know I'd rather go to the movie than almost eat, so that tells you something. And of course, COVID really hit me in a bad way. But anyway, there were 4 movie theaters in Lynchburg, and they all advertised in the hotel. And they would send free passes to the hotel, to my father. Guess who got the free passes? I did. So I pretty much, in those days, movies didn't stay long. They stayed maybe 4 or 5 days if they were really good, and they would go, and they would leave pretty quickly. So I had to make the rounds pretty quickly to do that. One of the, I guess perhaps the, one of the, let me say that was a premiere in Lynchburg, which I must have been about 7 or 8 years old at that time. It was called The Vanishing Virginian, and I've actually seen it on TCM. So it was done by MGM, and it was about the Commonwealth's attorney in Lynchburg at the time, in the 40s, 30s, and 40s, called Captain Bob Yancey. The Vanishing Virginian was based on a book that his daughter wrote, Rebecca Yancey Williams, and MGM filmed this book. And Katherine Grayson starred in it, but her mother would not let her fly across the country to come to the premiere. So MGM sent a substitute, Ruth Hussey. Some of you might remember Ruth Hussey. I don't think she was ever a top box office, but she was pretty well known. So she came in the place of Katherine Grayson. Well, there was a big premiere at the Paramount Theater in Lynchburg, and the escort of Ruth Hussey that night was a fellow called Bill Dudley. You may remember Bill Dudley. I think there's an award given each year in his name here in Richmond. He was a star of the football team of the University of Virginia at that time. And so he was the escort for Ruth Hussey. Everybody who was anybody was there that night at the premiere. And I had my best little coat on. I think it must have been in November, so I had a coat and I had a corsage. And so I came, and I'll never forget going to that. I thought it was the greatest thing in the world that you can imagine. But coming back that night, there in the front of the hotel, in the pavement, they had glass decorations, and I had my little thin-soled shoes on, slick as glass, and guess who fell down right in front of the hotel that night after all this big to-do? Everybody thought I had a concussion, so the doctor had to come and so on. So that ended the Vanishing Virginian for me. But Frances, I wrote about this. I see Frances Burse sitting right here in your memoir class. And your class is part of the reason I'm sitting here, because people have read Connie's book there, and also some of the things I got from your memoir class. So thank you for doing that. Another event that I thought was kind of interesting, and this is something that I think children do. I had a very vivid imagination, and as I said, I went to every movie that I think was shown in Lynchburg. And I went to see the Phantom of the Opera with Claude Rains, the Claude Rains version. Well, that's scary. Even the musical today is pretty scary. Well, I was probably too young to have gone, but I went anyway. And that night, after I went to sleep, I happened to look up, and there was a big rocking chair right by my bed. And who would be sitting in that chair but Claude Rains in his, all of his mask of the Phantom of the Opera. Scared me to death. I started screaming, and my mother came in. What is wrong? I said, Claude Rains is sitting in this chair. Well, there wasn't anybody sitting in the chair, but I could see him as well as I could see my mother standing by my bed. Of course, I realized later, and I think maybe I finally did go to sleep, but that maybe, I think movies have had a distinct effect on me as a result of that. All right, anything else? I think that's about all for that.
Yeah, I think you said you went to the movies very often in the afternoon because your father was available.
My father, yeah.
Yeah.
Yes, because he had the hours off between the hours of 3 and 5. So we always, if I went with my parents, and I would go at that time. And my first movie, incidentally, and I probably was 3 years old at the time, was Snow White, the original version of Snow White, which I guess is the best. And my mother said, now, the witch is going to be pretty scary, so don't worry, that's all right. Well, I sat through the whole thing, and then I wouldn't leave because I wanted to see it again. It never scared me at all. So I was already sort of in the mode for staying in the movie, and still am.
But it didn't quite prepare you for the Phantom.
No, it didn't. No, that's right. Perhaps it did. I don't know. Maybe indirectly.
Right.
Indirectly could have.
So, how did some of the staff become family for you?
Well, the staff really became my family. I was there for many years. For example, the bellman and the doorman, and would always greet me when I came in. One of them named his little girl after me, which I was very honored. And when I had a date, at the end of the hall, right in front of the apartment, there was a screen down at the end of the hall. And when my date would take me to the door, I could look down at the end of the hall, and guess who was peeking out from behind the screen? Many of the bellmen, to make sure that I got there okay, you see. And which was very nice for them to do. I didn't think so at the time. I thought, oh my goodness, what is this person going to think? But one of my fondest memories was one of the head waiters in the dining room. His name was Lacey. I called him Wacy for many years, but finally did call him Lacey. And we were very close, and he always took good care of me, always brought me potato chips when I perhaps wouldn't have been eating potato chips, but I did. So when I planned to go to Randolph-Macon Women's College, he went out to the college to see Dan the cook. Some of you may remember Dan if you went to Randolph-Macon. And he told Dan, I am sending Miss Barbara out here to school, and I want to be sure that she has good food while she's there. And I thought, oh my goodness, So every time there was a picnic or a large gathering, I would see Dan coming out from behind another screen or whatever and checking to see if I was eating. So, which was fine. Dan was a wonderful person, and some of you may remember if you went to Randolph-Macon that we all sang to him at the end of picnics and all of that kind of thing to let him know how much we had enjoyed our meal. So that was the kind of relationship I had with much of the staff. And then the day I got married, August the 16th, 1958, when I was leaving the hotel with all my finery, the staff was all lined up to make sure that they saw me off and to wish me luck. And I think they wanted to see if my dress was okay, if they approved of that. And then when I got to the church, a large segment came to the wedding, and I was quite honored that they were able to do this, and that they thought that much of me that they would make that effort to do that.
Yeah, it's wonderful. Now, I think, well, you said you were married in 1958.
Uh-huh.
And I think you left the hotel in 1957,
Mm-hmm.
a year earlier. So why did you eventually leave the hotel?
Well, I left there in 57 to go with my college friend to Newport News to teach at what was then my school, at Warwick Junior High School. A wonderful school because everybody in the faculty except two were all under 30. The principal was in his mid-30s, so there was quite an esprit de corps, and it was a junior high, middle school as it would be called now, junior high of 8th and 9th graders. And if you start your teaching career with 8th and 9th graders, you've got a pretty good chance of succeeding if you can overcome that, which I thought they were great, and they were. And the principal was great too. This is my first year. This was Christmas time. And one of the little 9th graders, several of them came up to me and said, I was Miss Page then, can we bring our music tomorrow? We'd like to, since this is Christmas and this is the last day of school before the Christmas vacation, can we bring our music? And I thought, oh, what do I do? And I decided, okay, you can bring the music. Well, they brought their music and then started dancing around the room. And I thought, oh, get in your seats, get in your seats. And all of a sudden there was a knock on the door, and there was the principal. And I thought, oh, I haven't lasted a year. This is still Christmas time. I'm not even going to fulfill the year. Well, he said, may I see you after school? And he was nice not to say anything then. So I went to see, I thought, well, this is it. I better call my mother and tell her I'm being sent out. Well, he was very nice. He said, Miss Page, you have the beginnings of being a really good teacher, but don't let the kids take advantage of you. This was a good example of this, and they can. You folks who have been teaching know this well. So I sort of learned my lesson from that. But anyway, the kids enjoyed the dancing party around the room. And so they did get by with that time, but not any other time. But I met my husband at Warwick Junior High. He was the art teacher, and I was the social studies teacher. And so therefore, the kids got hold of a romance being involved. You could imagine with 8th and 9th graders. And at the wedding the following summer of 1958, on August 16th, many of them came all the way from Newport News to Lynchburg to the wedding. So I thought that was quite an honor. For not only but me, but also for George as well, because he was honored as well as being there. Okay.
So that was a highlight not only of your teaching career, really, but your personal life.
Well, very much so. That's right.
Can you describe some of the other highlights of your teaching career?
Well, George then decided he wanted to, of course, get an advanced degree, so we took off for Athens, Georgia. He went to the University of Georgia and got his degree there. And I was lucky enough to get a job at Athens High School to teach history. And that was interesting because this was in the early 60s, and the kids all thought Virginia as a Yankee state. I said, what? No. So I had to explain, no, that was plenty of Southern history in Virginia. But it was a good experience. And then he took a position at Longwood, and that was in Prince Edward County, and we all know what happened in Prince Edward County. At that time, the public schools were closed, but I was teaching at the private academy, thank goodness, because we didn't have any money hardly, so that was good. I had a teaching job. And one day they were trying to reopen the public schools, and Bobby Kennedy came to town. And well, being a movie person and a person who likes celebrities, which I've already told you about, I thought, how can I see him during the day and I'm supposed to be teaching? Well, I hate to tell you, I told the principal that I had to go to the dentist. So you've heard that before. So I did, and I stood on the main street in Farmville as all the cars came by, and the group I was standing with, and I could sort of blend in with some of the Longwood ladies at that time. The car stopped right in front of us. He got out of the car and came over and started shaking my hand and others. I thought, oh, please don't let the Richmond newspaper or somebody be here, because I'm supposed to be at the dentist, you know. But I got to meet Bobby Kennedy. He was very gracious and we chatted for just a few minutes, and so that was kind of another celebrity in my life, which I enjoyed. Then he took a position at Emory and Henry College, which is out in Southwest Virginia, and we lived there for about 40 years. So I love the mountains. I sort of miss the mountains because Lynchburg is in the Blue Ridge. This is the Appalachians. And I love the mountain kids there as well, and had a wonderful, wonderful time teaching there. Ended my teaching career in Washington County. And I was lucky enough to be selected Washington County Teacher of the Year in 1976. And also had the yearbook dedicated to me at the high school as a teacher and as an administrator. And I think when the kids give any kind of award to an administrator, that's usually saying something that I really value. So I appreciate those honors, which I got, as much as anything that I've ever gotten.
Yeah.
Lee?
Finally, let's come back to the hotel. Mm-hmm. I had a chance myself to see the renovation of the hotel when, along with Beverly Beck and Karen Dillon, I traveled with you to Lynchburg so that you might be interviewed at the hotel. Would you describe what the hotel is like now?
Well, the hotel has really come back to life. As I told you, it was in bad repair. At the early, let's say the early 2000s and so forth. I think it was just left there. About. And two gentlemen, one from Richmond is named George Stanley. Some of you may know him. His mother was here. And the other gentleman is named Blair Godsey, who is from Roanoke, and he happens to be related to Bill Dudley, whom I've already told you about with the Vanishing Virginian premiere and the athletic award that's still in his name. And what they did, they buy up properties, which is not unusual. They build them back, bring them back to life, and then sell them and make their money back. Well, I think these two gentlemen got in more than they bargained for, because it took about 4 years to really get the hotel back to what it is now, at the cost of $30 million. $30 million, that makes, I would never sleep if I thought I had $30 million that I had to worry about. But anyway, when some of my Lynchburg friends found out that they were going to do this, they said, why don't you let somebody know, that you lived in the hotel, that you have some history with the hotel. And what my friend in Lynchburg did, she got in touch with some Roanoke people, and probably Godsey or his family. And it turned out that the early manager who sort of was able to oversee the reconstruction of the hotel knew a person who worked here, by the name of Bob Cox. Do you all remember Bob Cox, who was our facilities manager? Well, it so happened that this fellow got in touch with him and said, do you know a Barbara Chavatel who lives there? He said, oh, yes. So he got me together with the then person who was kind of in charge of the renovation of the hotel, let's say in 2015, 2016, somewhere in there. And we had several sessions. George Stanley eventually came here on several occasions to talk with me. I gave him quite a bit of my memorabilia of the hotel, so they have that. And eventually, I gave the present manager of the hotel my father's portrait, which my husband did. And I didn't know whether or not it was appropriate or not, but he wanted it. And he said, this is the present manager. And he said, oh, yes, I want it because he can look down on me. He can overlook and make sure I'm doing the right thing. And I was so honored by that, that I was pleased that I was able to do that. And the hotel today is managed by Hilton. So it's a quite different arrangement than when I lived there. They have done a beautiful job of renovation. Many of the grand staircase that when I got married, my reception was at the hotel, and I stood on the grand staircase and threw my bouquet over to the bridesmaids and so forth, and they kept that. That's still there. So I was glad that that wasn't torn down. They refigured the hotel. They have cut the number of rooms down from 200 to maybe 100, maybe 105, because remember the early days of hotels, even the Jefferson, the rooms were small, and they put rooms together. Well, they're doing that here, even with apartments, and this is what is done today. And but the hotel has gotten several awards. I was very pleased that this has happened. In October of 2019, the manager and his wife came here to have lunch with me and Kathleen's. And they were in Richmond because the hotel had won a prize for being one of the best hotels in the Commonwealth of Virginia. So I was very pleased by that, and very nice for him to want to come to see me and tell me that. So that was very helpful to me. Lee?
Yeah, well, Whitney, can you open us up for questions?
Sure. And this is a lot to take in. Thank you so much. So I'm sure we have some good questions in the audience. If you want to... So for anyone that does have a question, please raise your hand, and Jessica will come around with a microphone. All right, Dr. Fuller.
Thanks, Barbara. What
Yeah.
was Halloween like?
Oh, do you remember Halloween in Lynchburg? I know you all lived in Lynchburg. Everybody went down on Main Street and walked up and down Main Street. That's what they did then. The whole town came out in all these costumes, and up and down Main Street, and of course all around Church Street as well, you know. But Halloween was a big celebration in Lynchburg. I'm not sure why the reason. I don't know whether, did they still do it today very much? No? No. What they did then, I mean, everybody came out with it was a city celebration. I don't know the selections with Lynchburg and that or not, but it was very much a part of what you did on Halloween was to go down on Main Street and walk up and down for about a couple of hours and meet people and talk people. Okay.
All right. Give it I'll get right here and come back.
Yes. I just wondered if all of us have missed a step in our longevity of the crawling stage. My impression that the crawling that you did really was impressive. If you hadn't crawled, maybe you wouldn't have done all these things, but your initiative, I was just interested in that. It's just a crazy comment, but thank you. The crawling stage, to crawl, you crawled a lot,
The crawling.
right?
The crawling.
What'd you say?
Crawling.
Crawling. Yeah, that's right.
you
That's
crawled,
right. I
but
did. And that, as I said, if I wouldn't have gotten to meet Maria Garson if I hadn't
Yes,
crawled.
right. So I feel
As I
like
say,
I needed to relive my life and crawl.
That's right, Jane. Okay. Well, as I say, maybe my knees I think my knees are suffering from standing, trying to look nice in a classroom, standing on concrete floors in little shoes with pointed toes, heels about like that, which not too smart.
Barbara, I'm interested in your interesting careers you had. You worked at a state job and 2 federal jobs, didn't you? I think we'd love to hear about those.
No, now I taught school. I didn't have a federal job.
But you won some committee?
I was on, well, I've been on several committees,
Yeah.
but I've always worked, first of all, in public schools primarily. And then retired. When I retired here. And I came here really fairly young at age 70, which is sometimes young, but I'm glad I did. My husband had died. We had no children. I knew I had to take care of myself. And my husband is from Richmond, so I was in good stead with his family, thank goodness. And because his nephew and niece today really have supported me since I've been here. But I guess you say my years have primarily been in education on the city, county level, and I never did work for the state as such.
But you worked I've read somewhere about the 2 federal jobs you had.
No,
in Washington, you on committees?
No,
National
I didn't. I think that may have been the last lady who did this. It was I think had a federal job, but
Sorry.
I don't say. If I did, I must have slept through it because I don't remember it. But thank you for asking. Thank you for asking. Yeah. Yes, I did. Francis, as I say, I hope you remember. You're the one that kind of got me into this. Francis Birch, okay? Betty?
Your story is reminiscent of Liza Minnelli, who was
Yes.
in the plaza, and the children's book, Eloise, is based on her experiences there.
That's right. Very much so. And of course, I got the label a little bit of Lynchburg's Eloise, which I don't guess is quite the same, but anyway, an interesting life and an unusual life, which I've looked back on, sort of glad I have. Sometimes going through it, I wasn't too sure, because I was missing out on a lot with neighborhoods and children and all of that. But some of you may, if you're from Lynchburg, you remember the Floyd Ward School of Dancing. And that was sort of a rite of passage in Lynchburg, that everybody took dancing lessons. Not that we could become dancers, but that was the social thing you did. And it enabled me to meet a lot of people. So I was able to expand my friendship through things like that and through church and so forth.
Barbara, thank you for sharing all of this. Could you share a little more about your time in Abington?
Well, as I say, we lived there for about 40 years. My husband taught at Emory and Henry College. He was the art professor there. I taught in the public schools there at what was Patrick Henry High School, which is very near the Emory and Henry College campus. Then I went to the central office and worked there for about 9 years until I retired. And it was a wonderful experience to see education from K through 12, not just your own little bailiwick where you would live, where you were only concerned with yourself in your own classroom. So that gave me a wider experience of education, and also some wonderful experiences with students and working with teachers, which I enjoyed doing. At the high school level, I was asked to be assistant principal. And I didn't particularly want to do that, but I thought if I didn't accept that, and also later accepted the position of going into a supervisory position at the county level. And this is when women were first trying to break into some of these positions. If I didn't accept it, they would never offer it again to anybody. So I did. And I was very lucky when I became assistant principal of the high school that I taught in. That's not always the best arrangement, but that's what happened. And the other assistant principal and the principal decided that I would do the cultural activities. Well, one of the major cultural activities on their list were the dances that they would have after the football games and basketball games and so forth. Well, I'm not sure how cultural they were, but nevertheless, with the lights down low You had to sort of go around and make sure that everything was okay. I also had to get on my knees again and go into the restrooms and get down and look under, the door, because that's when smoking was going on. They were smoking. So I did that. So as I say, my knees, I think, have done well so far, but nevertheless. And I said, for this, I went to Virginia Tech for an advanced degree, But this is part of teaching. It's part of public school teaching, and I really enjoyed it. I learned a lot. And, of course, the problem there at dance was it ended at 11. And we already had always one policeman there. Well, he would leave at 11. Well, the problem was some parents thought that they could just send Junior off and he would somehow get home. Well, that didn't always happen. So there the kids sat, going on 12 o'clock, and nobody came. So I said, somebody's got to get on the phone and call, because out in the area that I was teaching in is Southwest Virginia, which is lovely, but they've got a lot of what the place is known as the hollers. Well, I was not going to get out in the car, maybe with a kid or two, and go way off somewhere, maybe drop him at his house. How would I get back? And this is before the day of cell phones, You'd be stuck. So I didn't want that to happen. But anyway, that was part of my cultural activities that I was assigned. But anyway, and of course I did some of the athletic events too, but I enjoyed it. It's nothing like working with teenagers. And I enjoyed the subject matter of high school, and I think that's why I really wanted to teach there. I taught U.S. government, U.S. history, world history, and humanities. Even had Time magazine as a textbook for one of the classes. And some of you know that I am a terrible Anglophile. And when we get to England in my world history class, I get so carried away. And here are the kids now taking notes, hopefully. And I would say, our queen did so and so and so. And I thought, oh my Lord, they're writing this down. I better check and make sure that I'm doing this correctly. But anyway, that's part of what I went through. Okay.
Wait, one more question in the middle.
Thank you. Barbara, your husband has a wonderful piece of art that you've given to the Westminster Canterbury. Could you tell us the story of that?
Well, it's a warrior. It's a metal sculpture which he did shortly after. Well, he actually did it in Farmville when we were living there, because he could find a place that could do metal sculpture. You've got to have the appropriate equipment, and you can't do it any place because you'll burn someplace down if you do that. So he loved. In fact, one of his teachers, or one of his fellow professors, I should say, at the University of Georgia, wanted him to do more three-dimensional work. He loved printmaking primarily. He loved doing that, and also working with acrylics and working with oils and painting, mostly abstract, because he's coming out of the 60s, now remember. So you remember what the 60s our art scene was like. But this is a warrior. I donated it. I gave it to Westminster Canterbury when the curator at that time was Sally Bowering, who was on the faculty of VCU. And George's undergraduate work was at VCU with Teresa Pollock. Some of you may remember Teresa Pollock. There's some of her work here, and she spent her retirement years here at Westminster Canterbury. And George wrote her a wonderful letter, which is still a part of the memorabilia of the archives at VCU, about his admiration for her. And somebody found it and gave me a copy of it, which I greatly appreciate. But anyway, this is a warrior. He's called Don Quixote. And he is across from the Canterbury Room. Westminster very kindly did a stanchion and paid for plexiglass to go around him so he can be protected. And I'm glad that people are enjoying him. I didn't want to keep him in my apartment because who would see him that much? So I'm glad he's being seen. So thank you, Don.
All right, any other questions? Well, you have covered so much for us today. This is fascinating. Thank you so
Thank
much
you.
to both of you.
And thank Lee. Thank you very much. Thank you all for being very patient.
And before we leave, I'd like to tell you about our next Who Knew. So on Wednesday, August 18th, Ann Archer will interview Jane Neer, who is a native of Richmond. After 48 hours of enduring a breech delivery, Jane fought to come into this world. She was quickly diagnosed as having cerebral palsy. Her father was a doctor and saw to it that she got the best doctor wherever he was. It was at Johns Hopkins in Baltimore that at least less than a month old, Jane was on Dr. Phelps' examining table, and shortly thereafter was braced and determined to face a good and normal life, even with a disability. Learn how Jane started to walk, ride a bicycle and horses, play tennis, touch football, snow ski, and even climb a mountain in Switzerland. It was with sheer determination and never saying no to anything that she wanted to do. She was and always has been her own advocate. Jane happily lives in the courtyard and invites you to come and hear her interesting story of beating the odds. So that'll be next month on August 18th. Thank you all for being here, and a big thank you to Barbara and Lee.
Thank you. Thank you, Whitney.